You ready? Our opening statement tonight is my mind is open, my heart is receptive, and miracles are happening to me. Let's say that together. My mind is open, my heart is receptive, and miracles are happening to me. One more time. My mind is open, my heart is receptive, and miracles are happening to me. Let's take that into prayer. I invite you to open your mind, your heart, your soul to feel the activity of God. And tonight, what if your mind and heart were receptive to more good than you've ever known before? What if you were the one that God picked to be so wildly blessed, to show the whole world how good life could be? Could you open a space to receive that much good? Could you open a space to receive all the good that your Creator has for you? That we get used to a level of life. And the longer we live at that level of life, the more we're convinced that that's what life is. And yet there are these opportunities that come along where life just shows us that it's so much more. I'm receptive. I'm aware. I'm awake. And I'm ready for all that God has for me. In the name and through the power of the living Christ, we give thanks. And so it is. Amen. Right? But we're going to focus tonight on the book Think and Grow Rich. I'm doing a series based on the books that change our life. And the first one we did was Illusions. And this one is Think and Grow Rich. And the thing that I like about these two books together is, for me anyway, they talk about the two aspects of what I think is important. Illusions for me was an affirmation of the spiritual truth of who we are. The infinite truth of who we are. That we all came here to be enlightened expressions of God. That we're infinite expressions of God. That we're not here to do spiritual work. We're not here to actually practice. We are actually here fully baked. We are fully enlightened when we get here, and we're coming into a place of remembering that. And then in Think and Grow Rich, it's like if you're enlightened, then what do you want to create? Like, what do you truly, honestly want to create? Because if this is heaven on earth, if everything that we need to create an infinite, wonderful universe is already present, then what do you want to create? And for most of us, we have been indoctrinated into a world of limitations. Where from the time we were raised, we were brought up believing that only so much is possible. And yet if we really believe that God is infinite, if we really believe that we are created in the image and likeness of God, then really all things are possible. And I love that. I mean, I look at my work over and over again, and that's what it's about for me. It's about helping people come to understand who they really are, created in the image and likeness of God, seeing them whole and perfect in every way, just amazing souls. And then the question becomes, when you really know who you are, the next question becomes, what do you want to create? And what are the principles that we can use to create literally anything with our lives? How many of you could see that maybe there's room for you to create a life that better reflects who you want to be in the world? Anybody? Great, right? And that's what, for me, that's what Think and Grow Rich is about. Think and Grow Rich really began, Napoleon Hill was the author of Think and Grow Rich. It was published in 1937. And at his death in 1970, there were about 15 million copies of the book that were sold. By last year, there were over 100 million copies of this book, right? That he began to write when he went to interview Andrew Carnegie. And Andrew Carnegie said to him, why don't you begin to ask the most successful people, this is in the 20s before the Depression, why don't you begin to ask the most successful people of our time what allowed them to be successful? And then actually begin to break those into teachable points that anybody could understand. And so he began to work on that. Throughout the 20s, he began to work on that. Into the Depression, he began to write pamphlets and booklets that anyone could understand, that the most successful people of his time were actually using to be successful. And if you look at it, by and large, they were all spiritual principles. By and large, they were all using spiritual principles to create the life that they wanted to create. And that's what he did. He taught spiritual principles. And in fact, if you look at what we teach today, if you look at the best-selling authors of today, over and over again, you see themes that he developed that we are rehashing, bringing into new words and new technology and but it's the same spiritual ideas that he was developing 90 years ago that are being reworked today, and we love them today, but when you go back and read his original work, you think, that's it. And so tonight what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you 5 spiritual ideas that he developed in the book that we have heard over and over again since then. And sometimes it's helpful to know who launched that idea first, right? Because I guarantee that every one of these ideas that I'm going to present tonight, you have already heard. And if you go back and read this book again, because I like to read it on an annual basis, if you go back and read this book again, you go, wow. How many books have been written that are, there's nothing wrong with it, but are restatements of his original work, his original idea on creation? And it's amazing to me. Well, let me just share the first one. You ready? How many of you have ever heard the idea that thoughts are things? Thoughts are things. Chapter 1, Think and Grow Rich, Thoughts are Things. I remember hearing a whole lecture by Deepak Chopra talking about the scientific evidence that thoughts are things. And guess where the first idea that was brought in, right, is Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich, that thoughts are things. And he talks about a story in this first chapter with a man named Edwin Barnes. And Edward Barnes wanted to be a partner with Edison. So Edward Barnes was a man of very little means, right? He got himself to New Jersey, where Edison was. He knocked on the door of Edison's laboratory and announced to Edison that he wanted to be Edison's partner. Later, Edison would say he looked like a tramp. Now, you got to, some of the wordage is, it's 90 years old, right? So he looked like, what would you say today? A street person, a bum? What would you say today? What word would you use? But he said he looked like a tramp, but there was such determination that I offered him a job. But he said, I don't really want a job. I didn't really come here for a job. I want to be your business partner. Now, how outrageous is that, right? Here's this guy with very little means, Albert Edison, very successful, already developed the light bulb, was doing it, right? And he said, I want to be your partner. And Edison was so impressed by his, I'm going to use another old-fashioned word, gumption, right? That he hired him for a very menial job in his laboratory. He hired him, and year after year, he worked over and over again, holding the vision that he wanted to be Edison's partner, right? But he was willing to do whatever it took because he wanted to be Edison's partner. So what happens is Edison develops this dictaphone thing, right? And all of his salesmen who've been selling his stuff think it's a stupid idea. None of them want to sell it. It's too big. It's a big old thing that they don't think is going to really work very well in an office. And they can't even imagine who would want to talk into something that would actually record. I mean, seriously, they can't imagine that anyone would want to sit at their desk and talk into something and it would record it so somebody else could play it back and type it out. They don't believe that that's a good idea. This guy says, I'll take it. And he takes one of the first prototypes of the machine and he sells the heck out of it. And Edison right there says, okay, we're now partners. You get all of the United States to market this thing, to sell this thing. And this guy goes nuts, becomes a very, very wealthy man. Right? Because, why? He had a thought that would not be denied. Right? And what I want you to see tonight is how often you give away your thoughts. And in the beginning, what happens is we get this divine inspiration. I believe it is divine. We get this divine inspiration from God, this idea of a possibility of what could be in our life and in our world. And it enters into our own consciousness. And instead of saying yes to the possibility of that, what do we usually say? No. We usually try to come up with at least 10 ways to kill it. Right? Because it's not just enough to kill it once. We have to come up with at least multiple ways to kill a good idea so we don't have to do it, right? Because to do it makes us so uncomfortable that we would rather kill it than actually move forward with a really good idea because it's so conflicting. It's so scary. It's so, well, who would I be if I did this? And in the original chapter, the first chapter of this book, Napoleon Hill says that every thought you think is real. That it's not just an idea, but it's a possibility. It's a thing that's tangible. Just like your shoes or just like your clothes or just like anything else. That it's real and it has life. And it has a possibility, and that you get to decide what you want to do with it. So do you see the challenge in this? So you get an idea, and every good idea is disruptive. Because every good idea lands in the status quo, and the status quo wants to snuff it out. Because it's not convenient. It actually requires action. It actually requires that we think a new way. It actually requires that we do something with it. And so every new idea, our humanity wants to snuff it out because it's disruptive. It blows up the status quo. It takes what's normal and regular and ordinary and invites us to say, what if that's not all? Right? And usually what happens is that we only launch an idea when everything's not working and that new idea is our last shot. Right? And tonight, what if you were willing to open a space for the ideas that God gives you, for the thoughts, the inspired ideas that Spirit gives you? So the first one, thoughts are things. 2, desire. Now, desire is still a hard one, right? How many of you have heard, maybe in your spiritual practice, that we're supposed to be suspicious of desires, right? So much, right? And it doesn't matter what your spiritual practice is, there's almost a belief that desires, that we should watch out for desires, right? He says in the opening sentence on the chapter on desire, he says, what the man of mind can conceive and believe it can achieve. How many of you have ever heard that quote before? Like, we've all heard that quote. What the mind of man can conceive and believe it can achieve. Now, the point that he goes on to make is that you have to want it before you're going to have it. Right? Now, here's the deal. How many of you have ever read anything by Abraham Hicks? Right? Have you ever heard Abraham Hicks say anything about the power of desire? Right? It's one of their underlying themes about everything is that it all comes to desire. And so what I want you to see is that 90 years ago, Napoleon Hill was talking about desire in such a way to activate that in us, that human part of us that had wants that we dismissed. Right? So in the second chapter, the invitation is to really look at what is the desire that is greater than your fear of something new. Right? Does everybody have a desire that's bigger than their commitment to staying where they are? I think we do. If we tell ourselves the truth, I think everybody has a desire, because I believe in the activity of spirit that's at work in humanity right now, is there's a desire for something far greater than we've ever known as a people, as a world, as a community, as nations, as a planet. And I believe that desire absolutely is for a world that works for everybody. Not a world that works for 1% or 2% or 10%, but a world that works for everybody. But we actually have to be willing to take that desire and implement it in such a way, to hold on to it in such a way that it actually allows us to build a world, a life that works. So if you were to honor your desires, if you were to tell yourself the truth, if you were to write down a list of your desires, would you be willing to see them and give them life? So if you had to pick your most important desire for your life, what would it be? Right? See, this is why we don't always want to do this work. Right? Because if we do this work, it actually changes everything. And sometimes we just want to say, my life's not so bad. You know, what's on TV? You know, my life's not so bad. You know, what's Jerry Springer doing this week? Yeah, people are watching that stuff. Right? Right? So what I want you to see is that there are these desires, these ideas that are here to transform us. But we actually have to be willing to entertain them, to hold on to them, so that we get to entertain a new possibility for our life and our world. So that was 2. Number 3. Number 3 is he talks about faith. And in number 3 he says, there is no limit to the mind except those we acknowledge. Both the poverty and the riches are offspring of thought. Every man is what he is. Every man is what he is because of the dominant thought which permeates and occupies his mind. Can I just read that one more time? Every man is what he is because of the dominating thoughts which he permits to occupy his mind. So faith is the belief that your dominant idea has the power to become a reality. Faith is the belief that there's a way, even if you don't know what it is. True? Is that right? So if you get an idea or a desire, right? Faith says, I believe that this is possible, even though I don't know how it's going to work. In the book, he tells a story about a son, one of his sons, his youngest son. His youngest son was born without external ears, right? So his younger son couldn't hear unless people were like right in front of him screaming, or like he learned that if you talked to his son and he spoke right into the bone in the back of his head, he could actually hear him through, because of the bone in his head, he could actually hear him. And so his youngest son, and yet Napoleon Hill, what he would do every night would speak to his son about the life that he believed that he could live. Right? His doctor, when he was born, said that his son would be a deaf mute his whole life. And Napoleon Hill heard that and said, that was not my opinion. My opinion is that he's going to have a fabulous life. And I don't know how that's possible, but I know it will be. And so he began to speak to his son every day about possibilities for his life. He talked about how the teachers were going to be great for him, and they were going to help him in ways that he couldn't even imagine, and how he'd be able to go to school, and how he'd be able to graduate from college. And he began to, as a young child, to speak about possibilities that he didn't know how they were going to come about, but he, in his heart of heart, knew they were possible. So as it works out, there, you know, at that time there was a device that they had developed to help people with hearing issues, and it was quite a large contraption, and it didn't work very hard. It didn't work very well. And he tried it, and it really didn't help him hear any better at all. And he was in college in this time, and he was really down. He was really discouraged. The whole family was down and discouraged that this new machine that was supposed to help and fix everybody didn't help him. And so they were disappointed, and he went on and he finished college, and then there was this other machine that was much smaller, and he didn't even want to try it, right? Because he didn't want to be disappointed one more time that it didn't work. And he tried it, and he put it in, and for the first time in his life, he could actually hear. He felt exactly the way other people hear. He could hear his classmates, he could hear his professors, he could hear. And he was so struck by this, right? That he wanted to go to New York to where this machine was being built, and he took a tour of the factory, and they talked to him all about it, and they showed him how they did it and why it worked, and he was amazed. And he went home, and one of the things that Napoleon Hill always said to his son was that this condition is not only going to be something that you have to overcome, but it's also going to become one of your greatest blessings. And so he went home, and for a month, he studied this machine. And he developed a marketing plan where he had this idea to ask, he developed this marketing plan where he would actually market this nationally to people with hearing challenges. And he spent a month developing this marketing plan, and he sent it to them, and on the spot, they hired him. And it was his first, it was actually his second, it was his second job ever. His first job, like his brothers, was selling newspapers. And his older brother sold newspapers, and his mom, because he couldn't hear very well, didn't want him standing on street corners selling newspapers because she was afraid that he'd be hit by a car or something. So one day when both of them were out of the house, he snuck out the kitchen window, went to what they called a cobbler on the corner, borrowed 6 cents, and bought newspapers with 6 cents. Sold the newspapers again, sold the newspapers again, and at the end of the day, he cashed out to the cobbler and the newspaper, and he made 42 cents during the Depression. And when they got home that night, he had the 42 cents in his hand. And his mom began to cry, right? Like such a sense of relief and hope and fear, like what was my baby doing out on the street selling newspapers? And Napoleon Hill at that moment knew that his son was going to be okay. He went through school, graduated, got a job. So tonight what I want to share with you is Napoleon Hill's recipe. He calls it his The 6 ways to turn desire into gold. Okay, you ready? There's 6 steps, and it's on, in my book, it's on page 36 if you're interested. The first one, he says, you must fix in your mind the exact amount of money you desire. It's not sufficient to merely say, I want plenty of money. Be definite as to the amount. Now, maybe your deal is not money. This book was written about growing people into wealth. But maybe that's not your deal. Maybe yours is a healing or whatever it is. But you have to be absolutely specific on what you want. So how much money do you want to make? How much money do you want to have? What's your healing? What's your relationship? Whatever it is, the first step is you have to absolutely be specific. Second, determine exactly what you intend to give in return for the money you desire. There is no such thing as something for nothing. So 2, determine exactly what you intend to give, right? What do you want? What do you intend to give? Third, establish a definite date which you intend to possess the money you desire. 3, what's the date when you're willing to have it? 4, create a definite plan for carrying out your desire. Begin at once, whether you are ready or not to put your plan into action. Now, it's not enough to just write out your plan, right? Because as soon as you write out your plan, what's going to happen? You're going to come up with all the reasons not to execute your plan, right? So it's not enough to come up with your plan, but then you have to be willing to actually execute your plan. 5, write out a clear, concise statement of the amount of money you intend to acquire. Name the time intend to acquire. Name the time limit for your acquisition. State what you intend to give in return for the money, and describe clearly the plan through which you intend to accumulate it. All right? Write it down. 6, read your written statement aloud twice daily, once just before retiring at night and once rising in the morning. And as you read it, see it, feel it, believe it, that you already possess the money you desire. Okay. Now, does that seem like a lot of work? Well, you got to come up with an idea. You got to come up with how much money you want. You got to come up with what you want to get back. You got to come up with a plan. Then you got to write the plan down, and then you got to read the plan twice a day. Oy vey, who has that much time, right? Right? So the idea is, if you're going to do this much work, why not make your plan great? Why not push the envelope beyond what's comfortable for you into a whole nother level that would just be fun to see if it could be possible, right? What if you were willing to join in that? Because one of the things Napoleon Hill said over and over again was to create a mastermind group. And what he believed in is that he wanted everyone to be, what he found was that successful people surrounded themselves in greatness. That they had people around who actually believed and were committed to the vision that they were committed to. So when you have your mount, when you have your date, when you have your plan, the only thing that I also want you to see is who stands with you in that experience. Who believes with you when you can't believe for yourself that day? Right? Who's your partner in that acquisition of this life that you desire? See, the most important thing is to be clear about what you want. It absolutely is. And then to see it. But you don't need to see it by yourself. You want 2 or 3 or 4 people who can see it with you. Last month I taught a class on creating a mastermind group. And it was just like an hour-and-a-half class. It was just how to create a mastermind group. But to actually do that, you actually have to, I wanted people to actually practice it, right? So try it once, right? The most amazing thing happened. There was a couple at that mastermind workshop who sold their house. They've been trying to sell their house for months. By the time they got home from that workshop, they had an offer. By the next day, they had a backup offer. Another lady came to me a week later and said, I absolutely got the job of my dreams. What I want you to see tonight is that there is so much more support for you if you're willing to share a vision and enroll people in what you desire. So here's the deal. What do you really want? What do you really want? I want you to write it down. I want you to see it. And then I want you to have 2 or 3 or 4 people in your life who you get together with on a weekly basis or a monthly basis or a regular basis who see the good with you that you desire. Because I promise you there's going to be times when you don't have enough faith for the desire that you have. But as you commit to it, as you commit to being surrounded by other people of greatness, your life will take form and shape in a way that you can't even imagine. You willing to try? So that's your homework. I want you to write down a plan. I want you to read the plan twice a day, but I also want you to have people that stand with you in that plan so that even in the days when you're feeling not so sure, they believe for you. Are you willing to try? Okay, let's play. I want you to open your mind, your heart, your soul to the activity of God that is right here, right now. I believe. I believe. I believe. I believe that with God all things are possible. I believe that God has given me permission to create a life that absolutely glorifies God in all ways. I believe that I have the ability to write it down, to believe, to see it, to join with other people who will hold that vision for me, and that we can create a world that works not only for me but for all people. I believe that there's no limit to the amount of good that God has for us. I believe that wherever I've been stuck or limited, wherever I've argued for my limitations, that my mind, my heart, my soul can expand beyond that. That my history no longer defines me. My desires define me. My committed plan of the future defines me. Tonight I take the first step in living a life that's absolutely fun. In living a life that is big enough and great enough where I can experience all the blessings of God. In the name and through the power of the living Christ, I say thank you, God. And so it is. Amen.